My name is Klaus-Michael Weltring. I'm based in Münster, Germany. And I'm a partner of a project called ENATRANS, which is the background of this webinar today. It's my first webinar, so we will see how things are working. And I think we just get started by giving you a small overview of what ENATRANS does and why this webinar, why this webinar was created. So let's see if I can share my screen. It's here. Okay. So I hope everybody can see my screen now. It's the front page of the ENATRANS project, which basically was set up by the European Commission and by some partners to figure out how we can support researchers and SMEs in this jungle of translation, or is illustrated like this, in this metro jungle of translation. So to not get lost, we have two main features in this project. One is an advisory board of several industry experienced people, and we will have a webinar on this specific feature, the Translation Advisory Board, on the 15th of December, and the time has to be decided, but we will announce it fairly soon. Now, the other feature of this project is a kind of a service we would like to produce for especially SMEs and researchers, so that you get an idea what is coming up when you want to get a product on a market. And as you will see, it's really complicated, but we try to make it as easy as possible for you, to give you an overview how this...
Klaus?
Yeah?
I'm sorry, this is Alex. Hello, everyone. We don't see your screen, Klaus.
Okay, thanks for the advice.
No problem.
Here we go.
Yes,
now it's
it will start.
Okay.
Much better, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. So we go here. Is it better now?
It is better, it's perfect.
Good, thanks a lot. So just to go back, that you see, this is the starting page of ENATRANS, and we have several services, and I told you about the Translation Advisory Board. You will get more information on the 15th of December. Now we have this, I would like to go to this service on the ecosystem, which is this page. Now, what we call the ecosystem is basically all the regulations and processes you have to go through to bring a product on the market. Now, this is complicated, and you can roughly distinguish it in 4 areas. One is the regulation, mainly dealing with safety, efficacy, and these kind of things. Then pricing, reimbursement, clinical trials, which are the 3 major areas. And this, of course, is different in all kinds of member states in the EU and also internationally. And what we try to do, and what I try to do with you now, is to go through these processes as we have kind of analyzed them in the past 2 years, to tell you what you can expect from this page, and also from a companion we piled up, and you can basically download at this point on the web page. But let's go through the page, and let's start with the regulatory process of nanomedicine in Europe. You may ask, okay, is there a specific regulation for nanomedicine? No, it's not, but any nanomedicine has gone through the same process as every medicine in Europe, and even in other countries. Now, we will focus on Europe, and first focus on medicinal products, which are different from medical devices, which I will come to later. The central organization in Europe is the European Medicine Agency, which is more and more involved in the regulation, and as you will see in the coming minutes. If you go to the EMA page, you will also see some documents, and one of the documents which you might refer to is a regulatory ecosystem description from the EMA. And if you click here, you will see that this is a user guide for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And this is very nice because it is very detailed, so much more detailed than our overview. And if we enlarge it a bit and go through some of the inventory, you can see that you get a lot of information on an SME initiative, how they define SMEs, what kind of incentives you can get to go through the process, and so on. So this is kind of the official EMA guideline or guidance through the system as EMA does see it. Now, we try to give it a little bit of an overview how things are in general. In general, you can have two choices. One is you go through a national authorization procedure. So you go to your national competent authorities, and I will tell you later who this is in different countries. Or you can go through a European authorization procedure. Now, this can be divided into 2 or 3 processes. One is you go to your national authorization agency, and the process is accepted by other member states. You can also make this not only in your own country, but at the same time apply in different countries, which is a decentralized procedure. And you get acceptance or authorization in these countries where you apply to. And then we have the centralized procedure, which is one single application for authorization valid in all EU member states. So these are the 3 choices or 4 choices you have. Either you go on a single state, or you try to go in Europe and select different stages you can take. Now, this is kind of the overview you can have. What is a medicinal product basically is defined in this directive, which we also have a link for. Basically, it's any substance in combination or combinations of substances presented as having properties for treating or preventing disease in human beings, and substances or combinations which may use or administer to human being either with a view on restoring, correcting, and modifying physiological functions. So it's basically pharma, if you want to make it simple. It is our advice to contact the national agency regardless what kind of process you want to take in Europe, because as we also learned from our German agency, even if the EMA, if you go through the centralized procedure, which I will illustrate shortly, then the EMA will also contact the national agencies, and usually the national agencies like it if they know already in advance what you're trying to get authorization for. So better to contact your national agency first, and then regardless of the procedure you do. The agencies in the different countries are, of course, national, and we try to figure out, and EMA was very helpful in this, that what are the agencies you have to go to. And this is a page from EMA where you can see the agencies of your country with all the addresses, contact data, and so on, and even links to the web page. So that is very convenient for you to contact the responsible agency in your country, and it's very detailed, as you can see. So that is very, very nice. So you go to your agency and say, okay, I would like to get this market authorization, and then depending on what you want to put on the market, sometimes you have to be using the central procedure. So for example, AIDS, cancer, and diabetes related products, or especially advanced therapy medicinal products, which have to go through the central procedure. And we even have found a link where you can find a definition what is advanced therapy classification. It's, as usual in Europe, regulated with all kinds of regulations and so on, but basically it goes, or it affects borderline classification, borderline products. For example, if you have a biomaterial together with cells and you want to put it into a body to restore a bone or any other tissue, this is a classical case of an ATMP, the advanced therapy medicinal product. So if you choose the central procedure, we also give an overview here. So you apply for EMA, and then they will involve a scientific evaluation and recommendation committee, which then makes a decision, gives it to the commission, and then the commission, if it is positive, decides if you get the authorization or not. If there is a negative vote, you can reappeal, and then there's a second recommendation, and then again it's put to the European Commission. So this is the procedure if you have to go for example, to bring an ATMP on the market. Now, the documents you have to use are these common technical documents, which are very formal and which have been worked out in collaboration with EMA, FDA, and even Japan. And so you have to use these documentation to apply to the EMA or even to your national agency. So this is kind of formalized. One important point, especially for SMEs, of course, is the fact, how do I get the money to run through this process? And here we have found some advice, even again from EMA, where you can get support at the EU level with financing. So they list different programs like COSME program or Innofin and other ones. So you have to screen through this to figure out if there might be some support from you for you to finance or at least co-finance this long process, because it takes a long time. So at least there is some financial help. Okay, since we are talking about nanomedicine in this special context, the question, of course, is there any specificity for nano? And the good thing is that nanotechnology, as some other technologies, is very new, and the EMA has established an innovation task force which tries to understand what kind of new technologies really come up. So they really have scientists gathered from internal committees and try to understand what kind of, for example, nanomedicines are coming up. So this is a basis where they establish discussions on an early dialogue with applicants to see, you know, what is new, how do our regulations fit, and these kind of things, identify the early need for special expertise. So they try to be prepared to really have the right expertise on board to evaluate these new technologies very early on. So this is kind of the scientific trial of EMA to understand what kind of new technologies come on in the near future or in the far future. So this is kind of a scientific preliminary discussion on new technologies by EMA. Now in practice, EMA has established two procedures to speed up the regulation process quite a bit. And usually it's always to bring disruptive technologies for example, unmet medical needs earlier to the patient. Now, the one program is called PRIME, Priority Medicines, and the description of this program is given here. Basically, it's an accelerated assessment where the EMA tries to look at your very early clinical and preclinical data and kind of guides the applicant with scientific advice through the regulations. So it's basically something which helps you to make this regulation process more efficient. So, for example, you have to appoint a rapporteur from this Committee for Medical Products and Human Use to be responsible and to help to build knowledge ahead on a marketing authorization application. So they start very early and then have a kickoff meeting and guidance on the overall development plan and regulatory strategy. So it's really a very hands-on and close support through the process, which of course helps a lot when a company wants to bring something disruptive on the market. But as they say here, the eligible criteria is that it focuses on medicine that may offer a major therapeutic advantage over existing treatments or benefit patients without treatment options. So I think the Ebola vaccination was kind of an example where they try to speed up the process quite a bit with these kind of programs. Now, the other program we have found, and which is also meant to help SMEs, especially to bring products on the market, is the medicine's adaptive pathway to patients. The difference here is that it's a little bit an iterative process in the way that it starts with very small groups of patients which have been identified by a biomarker and to be very susceptible for this kind of treatment. So then they start these kind of limited clinical trials and then move to real-time clinical trials. So in the way that you kind of bring this preliminary on the market, but closely monitored how the efficacy, the safety, and all this is working out. Again, this is primarily focused on areas of high medical need, where it is difficult to collect data via traditional routes and where large clinical trials would unnecessarily expose patients. So this is mainly on orphan drugs, for example, where you also do not have a lot of patient groups where you can make a lot of clinical trials or large clinical trials. It also involves a lot patients and patients' organizations. So it's also a process which starts small and then tries to, on an iterative process, to go through the process with clinical trials and be on focused patient groups. Okay, so this is basically what you have to, what the processes are when you want to bring a medicinal product on the market, so mainly covering the pharmaceutical area. And I would advise you to subscribe to the SME Office newsletter, especially if you're on SME, which updates you on new papers published by EMA, new regulations, and so on, so that you are aware of what is changing in this regulatory ecosystem. Now, that this is very dramatic and very important to know is shown by the regulatory process on medical devices. As I told you in the beginning, there are two different regimes. One is medicinal products, so mainly pharma, and one is medical devices and in vitro diagnostics. Now, in this area, so far, there is a directive on medical devices, which is still in place. And we have the link, as usual, where you can read about this. It's a lot of pages. way you can look at this. However, this is kind of the running out version of the regulatory process, because the directive has been under revision, and there are now new regulations in place on medical devices and in vitro diagnostic medical devices. Now, what is a medical device? It's mainly an apparatus or an instrument or software or material, mainly focusing on diagnosis, prevention, and investigation, replacement, and so on. So implants can be like this. So it's mainly not a chemical which is put into the body, but mainly some material or apparatus, and even a wheelchair is under this regime. Now, as I told you, the medical directive is now being replaced by a medical device regulation. Now, the difference between a directive and a regulation is that the regulation, which is now, which has been published in this year in May 2017, it applies to whole Europe and doesn't have to be adapted to the national law. It becomes basically national law. And this is very different to the directive, where member states had a lot of freedom to set specific rules and regulations within this directive. Now, this regulation sort of comes into force within 3 or 5 years, depending if you talk about the devices or the in vitro diagnostic regulation. And these regulations have a huge impact on the medical devices. Now, what does change? Now, first of all, since it is a result of this breast implant scandal, where notified body didn't do his job properly, supposedly, the new regulation requires that the notified bodies lose their status and have to be reapply and have to get audits, which is so far important, because the audits take a while, and I think the auditation or the auditing has not started yet. So the notified bodies will not be able to do their job before summer or even fall next year. So whenever you want to go through this regulation, at the moment you can't, because the notified bodies are not certified. On your side, the technical documentation needs to be much more detailed, and more products require clinical trials, which is really dramatic, because, for example, so far 80 to 90% of the IVD products will require this, while this currently is only like 20%. And in addition, you have to give a complete oversight of your supply chain, including importers and distributors. So this will require a lot of documentation, much more documentation, as it has been done before. It also requires that you have to go to certain data banks for example, device identification. You need this identification number. Problem is, the data bank is not set up yet at the European Commission. So you cannot get this number, which of course hinders you to bring something on the product on the market. So the notified bodies are not ready to go. The data bank is not ready to go to get this unique device identification number. So right now, you only can apply maybe under the old directive, or you have to wait until all this is in place. For me, a very important point is that all manufacturers need to authorized, representative, knowledgeable, and responsible person for regulatory compliance, ensuring the declaration of conformity, performance evaluations, and vigilance requirements are kept up to date. So this means that each company which wants to put a medical device of a higher class on the market needs this kind of authorized representative, which of course is a very expensive person and maybe not readily available. So this is really, for me, a very big requirement, which puts a lot of pressure and a lot of will cover or will use a lot of resources at the companies, and might be a big problem for the small companies because, as I said, they might be very important, expensive. So the question is, how can we help SMEs with this? I know that in France, and I think also in other countries, there are negotiations to put committees in place to help SMEs to cover with or to cope with these regulations. So maybe you can contact your national union for medical devices to figure out if there is some help, if you're an SME, for coping with this regulation, what kind of data you have to produce, and so on. So as I said, the notified, I will not go through the regulatory process, the current one, because this runs out, but if you want, you can see the basics on this scheme. Now, as I said, the notified bodies are specific for each member state. Depending on the size of the member states, there might be several. I heard that Austria at the moment doesn't have any because of this high pressure of getting audited or getting certified themselves. So we have to see, or you have to see in your country, where is the notified body. Now we will help you in this a little bit because we have here a list of where you can find notified bodies. For example, in Austria, or let's go to, for example, to Austria. Let's see if we can find something there. Now, this covers for all kinds of product, as you can see, even construction techniques and so on. That's why you have a filter up here, and you go to medical devices, and you see it boils down to 2 at Austria, which are listed here. So these are the 2 agencies you have to contact if you want to put a medical device on the market in Austria. At least there are 2 listed, and I hope they are still there. Immer noch? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is definitely a mess. So we have to see how this develops, and I can only advise that you go to the local notified bodies if they react, because they are kind of coping with themselves, to get this advice how to put this on the market. So be aware that there is a lot of mess coming up. Now, this is on the regulation part. Question is, if somebody of you has a question, maybe we can try to answer a few questions on this part if you have it. I just have to figure out how I can see that you want to ask a question, because then you have to click on this hands button, and I can see who wants to ask a question. Is there a question? Okay. Then I go on, and with the next part, which is clinical trials. Now, clinical trials are specifically regulated, and we have a little scheme here. It basically follows preclinical studies, and then you get through different phases, phase 1, 2, and 3, and then also to market surveillance, so pharmacovigilance. In these phases, there are different issues which are looked at. So first, of course, in preclinical studies, safety and metabolism, animal testing, these kind of things are tested before you really can go to patients. Now, in phase 1, it's first in man called, you look at tolerability of the compounds. So you see if they have any adverse effects on healthy patients, basically. And then in phase 2, the cohort of patients is larger, as you can see below. And here, besides safety, efficacy, and side effects are the specific issues you look at. And then in phase 3, it's a big study made usually through different countries where you have the proof of safety, tolerability, and efficacy. And last but not least, after you put your medicine on the market and patient take it, you have to monitor the market for any adverse effects you might come on the long term. So we go from in vitro to increasing patient numbers to make sure that your compound is efficient and also doesn't have any harmful effects. The clinical trials directive is running out because there is a clinical trials regulation coming up, which becomes applicable in next year. And the main characteristic here is that in contrast to the current situation, registration is via a single entry point portal. So for all clinical trials in Europe, there is a harmonized authorization procedure, and the authorization procedure by the national competent authorities is according to a common protocol. This is a major advantage and major improvement because so far all clinical trials have been differently regulated in the different European countries. And now at least they have agreed on a single entry point and harmonized protocols, which of course is a big help if you want to do clinical trials in different countries. Now the process is basically like this. You have a submission through the portal, and then one of the member states is a reporting member state. So if you want the principal investigator, but he contacts several other member states and the competent authorities there to make a report and make a scientific evaluation, and finally you get these decisions and then get a report on this. You can get an overview of the clinical trials from a clinical trial database, and there's also an EU clinical trials register, which allows public access and search of information for completed and ongoing clinical trials. So if you want to see if something similar to your medicine is on the market or is already in clinical trials, you can go to this register and see if something similar is there. Now, if you want to go to clinical trials, you basically have two parallel routes you have to go to. One, of course, is the national competent authority, where you have to make your documentation according to ICH GCP documentation. Here you can see the definition. And this is basically a standard for setting a criteria for conduct, monitoring, auditing, and reporting of clinical trials. So this is a very standardized protocol. And in parallel, you also have to apply to the ethics committees. Now, the ethics committees, of course, is complicated because you have national ethics committees, but usually you would go to your regional ethics committee. We try to give you an overview what kind of national or European ethics committees are there and how they are organized. And here we have this European Network of Research Ethics Committees. This is a web page where you can go to and you can look in your country what kind of ethics committees are available. And for example, if you click on Germany, you have a description of this system. You can scroll down and see that, for example, in Germany, we have the National Council for Ethics, der Deutsche Ethikrat, but we also have a Central Ethics Committee of the German Medical Association. So there are different national ethics committees and a lot of local committees, which are usually can be found through these national ethics committees. So in this case, you have to maybe go to this page and then go to your country and see if you can find the right committee where you have to apply to, unless you do not already have contact to your local or regional committee. In general, we would recommend, and I think this is a normal way, that once you want to put a product on the market, you go to a contract research organization, CRO, which are usually the guys who are very professional in guiding you through all these regulations, because especially as an SME, you are usually not able to understand and go through all these regulations by yourself. So you would usually go to a CRO and figure out if he can, or if this CRO can help you. Now the question is how to find one, unless you don't have an advice from somebody else. You can go to this entry portal, and I have to enlarge it a bit. Wait a minute. And here you can see that in different countries, you have kind of unions of CROs, and you can contact them and go to their website and see if you can find through these national unions or organizations a CRO which is fit for purpose for your product, because usually these CROs are specialized in different areas. So pharmaceuticals, medical devices, IVD, or even in medical devices, maybe to certain areas. So, and as I heard, there are big differences between CROs. So you have to carefully select these CROs, of course. Okay, so this is what you have to do, let's say, technically and scientifically. And you would think that this is now the point where everything is set up. You get your market authorization, clinical trials are running well, the product is there, and now you earn money. No, because now you have to go through this pricing and reimbursement process, not only for nanomedicine, but for all medicines. And this is what most people forget, because you would think if you have the market authorization, everything is fine. You put your product on the market, get the price you need to get return on investment. But this is thought too easy. Because once you get the market authorization, then you have to go to your national ministry or medicine agency or federal institute, and they will look at your product and say, okay, is it non-innovative? So is it the same or something which is already on the market? Is it innovative, so disruptive, very new? Or is it an over-the-counter product like pain relief pills or these kind of things? And based on this classification, then the federal authorities or even sickness funds or regional authorities will decide on the price. Now, if it is non-innovative, then they will set the price based on products already on the market, so on reference prices, and usually there is some reference in Europe. If it is very innovative, you have the chance to free negotiate. However, there are certain limits, especially in Germany and other countries, where you can go not too much above, and usually it's only for a temporary time. So this is a big debate on how much money you can earn in this phase to get your return on investment. And if it's over the counter, of course, it's free pricing, whatever you can get through on the market. So this is then the critical part where it is decided if you get a price which will cover the cost you have to put in the development of the product. And there are no cases where everything was fine, the market authorization was there, but then the reimbursement was too low, so the companies did not put the product on the market because they couldn't get the return on investment. And that might be the case for certain member states in Europe, or it may be the case for whole Europe, which is really a pity. So I think, or we think, that you should, as early as possible, try to contact the entry points or the ministries or whoever is responsible to figure out what kind of reimbursement you can expect. And to help you with this, we have here some entry points listed for different countries. For example, in Belgium or Cyprus or Germany, it's the Federal Joint Committee, the GBA, where you have these evaluations, and you can contact them early on and say, okay, I mean, is there a chance to get enough money back? And more and more in these processes, the health technology assessment becomes a big issue. So basically, where committees decide if the product you put on the market is really an advantage for a patient, if it is disruptive, if it is more efficient. And so this is sometimes a big debate if this is the case or not, because of course you can think this can be negotiated. Now for member states, for medical devices, it's even more complicated, because here the decision is even on regional basis, or for even some health insurances. And it's well, I would say even a bigger mess. Again, to help you with this, we listed here pricing and reimbursement agencies and procedures, at least ideas. For example, in Austria, sorry, this is too big. The prices are not statutorily regulated, but freely set by manufacturers. So this is a very comfortable situation. In Germany, manufacturers even negotiate prices with hospital or hospital groups. So there you are on a really very local, regional or level. And so it's different in all countries, and you have to figure out where you can put your product on the market. But here you can already see that maybe you can put your product on the market in Austria, but not in Germany. So you have to figure out what are the procedures, how are the decisions by these decision bodies done, and where can I get the money back? And that's why we have differences in pricing in European countries, even between European countries. And this is a system you have to play with once you want to put your product on the market. To get an overview of the HTA agencies, we also have a link down here where you can find this. This is only, this is German, but here down here, you can find, for example, in Europe. So we have links to European agencies and so on, like Denmark, Belgium, and so on. So this page gives you at least links to your country where you can get further advice and so on. Okay. So we got the regulation, we got the repricing, and once you get through this process, your product will be on the market. And as you can see, it's really complicated, but we try to give you an overview of what's going on and where to go to get help, advice, and to understand the process in more detail. you can, of course, contact us, and you will see the contacts on the internet page of ENATRANS. You can also go to the European Technology Platform on Nanomedicine, where this is kind of the umbrella of all these projects, where you can also find help and to see if we can, assist you in bringing your product on the market. And one additional point I would like to mention here is that we also try to have a look at the situation in other countries. And these are the countries we have looked at. And what you can get here is basically an idea. For example, if we go to China, the regulatory process, again, on medicinal products, medical devices, you get the links to the different regulations, but also to agencies and so on. So that you at least get a kind of small overview what is expecting you if you want to go China, Korea, or US. And we hope that this will at least give you an entry point to these different countries, so that you can figure out where to go, where to get help, if there are agencies which support you in these kind of regulations in the different countries. Okay, so this is basically what we have tried to compile for you as an assistance to give you an idea what kind of regulatory ecosystem is out there in Europe, in the current member states, but also internationally. If you have questions, you of course can contact us via the website if you want. And at the moment, we have still, I think, 10 minutes or so to go, where you can make comments or where you can give an idea on or have questions. Are there questions? And I trigger. Let me see. Okay.
Klaus?
Yeah.
Hello, Alex speaking.
Yes, I see.
Well, yeah, and I raised my hand.
I saw, yeah.
So first of all, thank you very much. I think it's quite a unique amount of information and knowledge and data about the whole complex process of regulation in Europe. I'm not sure that in every kind of medical technology they have gathered such an amount of general and practical information. So first of all, thank you very much for this nice effort of the ENATRANS project. I think it's really useful, even if it's still complex at the end. It's really useful, as you said, to have a, let's say, information at least about the entry points and the global picture, the helicopter view of the system. I have a few remarks and questions for you, if you're okay. The first one is about the modification of the process of regulation for medicines also. So you said that we are going to have a unified, let's say, entry for the whole, for the authorization at the whole European level and not at each national level like it used to be. Is this simplification goes with also more complex regulation? Is it more severe than it used to be, or do you think it's just a matter of processes, like a simplified process?
No, the central or the new regulation is only affecting clinical trials. So the clinical trials have been handled only nationally, and they still will be handled nationally. But here we have the simplification because all applications have to go through the central entry point in Europe, and then we'll distribute to the member states. And the protocols are kind of harmonized to a certain extent, so that the criteria are more, let's say, more comparable compared to what has been on the regulation or on the directive before. So the simplification is more on the clinical trials part. The complication you were talking about was on the medical device regulation, which of course is a big mess at the moment.
Yes, and maybe it's the end of the old cliche of it's simpler to develop some nanomedicines as a medical device in Europe, and this is the end of this. I wouldn't say golden age, but this special age. My second question is about the UNCL that most of you know already, which is the European Nanomedicine Characterization Lab. My question was, do you think at which stage of the regulation process do you recommend that people apply? I don't know if Simon is here, maybe. I think it's really the kind of features that are really specific to nanomedicines when you compare to classical medicines, which is more complex characterization of the product, which gives even more complexity to the process and the translation to the market. So do you have any comment on at which stage should people try to connect with UNCL and start to help their regulation afterward?
Yes, if you want to have detailed information, you should join the webinar next Friday, because then I will give a short introduction to the Nanomedicine Translation Hub, which is consisting of the EUNCL, the European Nanomedicine Characterization Lab, the Translation Advisory Board, and others. Now, coming to your question, I think the preclinical studies have to be done by the European Nanocharacterization Lab, in the sense that we there have, let's say, experience of looking at the efficacy, but mostly on the safety of nanomedicine products. So this is very specific to nanomedicines. And as you know, we are in close contact to EMA to see if the test systems we apply there are in accordance to what they require, and we even try to accomplish improvements of these test systems, again in collaboration with EMA, to adapt the test systems which have been elaborated for small compounds, also fit the nanomedicines. So if you have a nanomedicine you want to put on the market, the first, let's say, the first address should be the European Nanocharacterization Lab, and the second is, of course, the Translation Advisory Board, to get some idea on if your product really is able to make it to the market. And then you go to the ENATRANS and to our ecosystem website and see what you have to do and where to go to. I think that will be my advice, how you would, or the order of steps you have to take to bring your nanomedicine on the market.
Well, thank you very much for the answer and the teaser about the next webinar. I'll be there also. Well, thank you for that. That was my two first questions. Thank you, Klaus.
Good morning, Klaus Michael. I'm Daniel from Nanoimmunotech.
Okay.
I will ask only one thing is regarding GMP and GLP. If you can give us any advice, mainly when to get this GMP production, or if at the beginning or in only for clinical trials. So if you have any advice regarding those two, the GMP and the GLP.
Yes, this is in so far, well, easy not, but there are 2 points. One is, if you go, I don't know if you already contacted the European Nanomedicine Characterization Lab, because in this case, you will get free of charge analysis or characterization of your product. So you get an idea if the safety and efficacy is according to what is expected to bring the product on the market. Now, if this is the case, then it would make a lot of sense to make a GMP production, which you have to do anyway if you want to put anything on the clinic. Now, we have discussed at the Nanomedicine Characterization Lab if we want GMP batches to make this characterization, and there are pros and cons on this. So this is basically a matter of negotiations. But the characterization done by this EUNCL is certainly a criteria where you can decide if GMP production makes sense. GLP, I think I would always use to make sure that even the lab batches do have a quality which make a characterization meaningful, because if you have small laboratory batches which are produced not respectively but university style, let's put it this way, then it's difficult to have batch to batch consistency, which is definitely a pre-requirement. And the second point to make a decision on GMP, of course, is to contact the Translation Advisory Board. So contact people who can give you an idea if that what you want to produce is not already on the market, or is efficacy, or is efficient enough, or is producible by industry. These kind of criteria, which I think are very important to make these decisions. I hope this answers your question.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much.
Okay, there are still 4 minutes to go, or 3. Any other question? Otherwise, I mean, I went very quickly through the webpage, but you can do it more on yourself. And if you have questions, make a contact, and you will find our contact data at the website.
Klaus?
Yeah.
Just a final comment from my side. As we saw, it's really an evolving system. It's not static, and things are changing quite fast in the medical device indeed, but also for classical medicine. So since ENATRANS will end at the end of the year, just to let people know that the Nobel project will continue these efforts, and Klaus, you're personally involved in the Nobel project that we coordinate at the TPN. So we'll do our utmost effort to keep that great knowledge up to date, available for people, and as relevant as possible.
And I should add that I made sure with the VDE in Berlin, who is running this webpage, that this webpage is open at least for another 6 to 12 months, so that people who want to go this here in January still have access, which would be a pity if it would be turned off.
It won't be.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Klaus.
Okay, so I think you got an idea. The details are on the webpage, and next Friday at the same time, I will give an overview of the translation hub. What we call the hub is the Translation Advisory Board, the EUNCL, and also GMP pilots, which are part of this hub. So if you want to get an even bigger picture, join us next Friday at 10 o'clock. Thanks a lot, and goodbye, everybody, and thanks for joining.